Hey everyone, today we're going to do a little bit of learning about plotting our stories with different types of tools. So you may remember a few days ago I told you that fiction writers don't just choose a story idea and go straight to writing it. Instead, fiction writers use strategies for bringing characters to life. Strategies like imagining their characters in everyday scenes, just like when we took ours for a test drive. They consider the internal and external characteristics of the main character, the protagonist. And writers go through their lives thinking, what would my character do in this situation? They give special attention to what motivates a character and the obstacles that get in the character's way. Writers postpone thinking about the details of what happens in a story, about the plot of a story, until they've done this other work. They postpone thinking about the sequence of events because eventually they take all they know about their characters, especially their understanding of the character's motivations and obstacles, and they use this information to create a plan for their stories. So today I want to teach you that after writers develop their characters, they draft possible plots for their stories. Fiction writers plan by plotting the arc of a story, and specifically by aiming to intensify the problem or the conflict. They do this by using what they know about plotting and then choosing from a variety of tools to help them plan. So many famous authors and writers rely on story arcs to think through the plots of their stories. And of course, there isn't just one way to do this. So, one gentleman, Kurt Vonnegut, he is a very well known American author with many accomplishments to his name. He once laid out 5 common story arcs that stories follow, and I'm going to show you 2 today. One, for example, he calls Man in Whole, and he described it in this way. You will see this story over and over again. People love it, and it is not copyrighted. The story is Man in Whole, but the story needn't be about a man or a hole. It's this. Somebody gets in trouble and then gets out of it again. It's not accidental that the line ends up higher than where it began. This is encouraging to readers. So taking a look at the way this arc is set up, it looks at the story as it moves from beginning to end and how the character's fortune changes, or maybe the circumstances they encounter change. Let me show you another one. See if you can guess what story this one is describing. It's a really famous one. The arc begins way down at the bottom, where the character is having some ill fortune. It's about a truly despondent girl whose mother died and whose dad remarried a horrible woman with 2 horrible daughters too, who treat this girl like a servant. Things are about as bad as they can get for this girl. And then there's an invitation to a party, and everyone gets to go except the narrator. But then a fairy godmother appears, and she sends the narrator off to a party dressed to the hilt. Things shoot up way from there because Cinderella, you probably guessed it, attracts the prince's attention. And of course, as you all know, when she leaves the party and drops her shoe, things go back to being rotten for her, except they aren't as bad as they used to be because Cinderella now has these awesome memories of a perfect evening. And when the prince locates the girl who fits the shoe, things spiral into infinite amounts of happily ever after for Cinderella. Notice that these 2 arcs look very different from each other, but what overlaps is that things go up and down for the characters. Both arcs rise and fall as the plot also rises and falls. So you might be wondering, so what? Story arcs can help you figure out the rises and falls of your own plot because they remind you that it's not just one event after another with no real change or climb. It's like each scene in the arc is a whole new movement for your character. That's what makes readers want to keep reading, to find out how the character will get through the other side of this arc. The story arc also shows you that something is going to happen and things are getting tough. Then something happens as the story curves or arcs that changes things or that solves your character's problem. After that, things change, your character is different, and there isn't a feeling of anticipation anymore. So earlier this month, we discussed how stories usually go. that usually the main character has wants, and something gets in the way of him or her getting to these things. So the character encounters trouble or a problem. Sometimes we call this a complication, or maybe it's the major conflict in the story. And we've learned that characters, after encountering this problem, have to find a way to deal with it somehow, and that gives movement to the story. A lot of times the problem or the conflict intensifies, it gets worse before getting resolved, with the character experiencing a couple different complications or small challenges along the way. Or it gets resolved in a different way than the character imagined or hoped for. In this way, the story doesn't just go from one event to another in a flat way, but rather each scene builds on the one before it. You may think back to when we read The Scholarship Jacket recently. We talked about how the story went and how the pieces of the story fit together. And if it were to be written as an arc, these are probably some of the major events you'd think to include. If we took time to make a visual representation of this, it might look something like this. Thinking about how Martha starts out pretty confident, pretty happy, and throughout the story, these different complications or small challenges pop up and get in the way of what she wants. We know that ultimately she wants to earn that scholarship jacket. But if you look at my example, the little red stop signs along the way, those represent different types of complications. And eventually we get to the turning point, or kind of the climax of the story, where things really change for the better for this particular character, and I marked that with the star. So this is not unlike the Man in the Hole style arc that you saw before. Now I'm thinking about how I might try this with my own writing, and I'm thinking about my character Ryan and where I want his story to go. And so for me, I know that the story starts out, and Ryan is kind of in a low place because he's grieving the loss of a friend. So I started my arc below the middle axis. And for him, things kind of get worse before they start to get better. He's performing poorly at practice because there's a lot on his mind. I'm not sure on this part yet, but I'm thinking he's going to get benched during the game. There's some kind of complication that makes the situation a little bit worse. My arc is kind of flat because things are so bad for him already. It's not really a drastic drop. But eventually, something's going to happen in my story, and I'm still working on this piece. Something's going to happen, the turning point. I want my story to have a happy ending. So we're going to pull Ryan back up into that good fortune area, and somehow there's going to be a turning point in the story where his team comes back and they really go in for the win. I know that my story is going to end somewhat happily. So thinking about authors in general, when authors begin work on a story, they may have a solid idea of what the story is about. However, they don't typically know at that point in the very beginning what exactly will go on every page. Great authors take time to imagine one way their story might go, and then another, and another. And so that's what I want you to try today. Using this blank template, I want you to try and create the shape of your story. And you can use paper and pencil and kind of recreate this image. You could use an app like Sketch or Notability too. But think about the shape of your story, the complications your characters might face, and what that might look like visually. I'm really excited to see how your stories are going to take shape.